The college basketball season has kicked off, and that means it is officially not too early to talk about the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad draft of 2024. But maybe, just maybe, there are good players to be found. Welcome to Chucking Darts, a podcast of informed, rigorous, reckless, harmless, speculative, and fun predictions about the game we love. You can call me Chuck. This is episode number 184. Episode number 183 was last week. That was a solo episode where I did just responded to a tweet that I posted about asking any questions about the early NBA season. So I talked about the Houston Rockets, who are my favorite team to watch this year. I talked about the Orlando Magic, Los Angeles Lakers, some standout individual performances, and just sort of opened up the dart bag, as it were. So check that one out if you're following the NBA. I would presume that you are. But today is a college basketball episode with friend of the podcast, formerly of ACC Sports, but one of the foremost experts in ACC basketball in the country. It is Mr. Blocker Mover himself, Brian Geisinger. Brian, welcome back. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me back. And thank you for sparing me NBA conversation so I don't have to talk about the Charlotte Hornets and the depressing state of the franchise that I cover in the NBA.
Yeah, man, Buzzbeat podcast, by the way, it doesn't mean the work you're doing is any less good.
Yes.
So you, friend of the show, Lee Branscombe, we all go back a ways. And when I reached out to you about this episode, I was like, yeah, and some Hornets talk, but maybe sort of less is more as far as that goes, at least on this show. I think you probably cover it all. And with the news that Miles Bridges is returning this week, I don't really think that anything that we would have to say basketball-wise would really make a dent in the discourse. I think that it's going to be a narrative sort of coverage for a while, and that's sort of what happens. So, but Mr. Geisinger, let's go back a little further to simpler, happier times. It was March of 2023. March Madness was in full swing. We recorded 2 episodes at that time. One was about the surging Duke Blue Devils going into that tournament, who had won something like 9 games in a row, and how we thought a certain center named Derek Lively was establishing himself as a bona fide and very underrated NBA prospect. Lively now thriving for the Dallas Mavericks in mostly a starting role. And then later on, in front of maybe we might have recorded 3 episodes that time, but we previewed
we did
the Miami Hurricanes and the Houston Cougars, a 5-seed, 1-seed Sweet 16 matchup, where we extolled the virtues of Norchad Omier, Wooga Poplar, Isaiah Wong, Jordan Miller especially, and how we thought Miami had a real shot. Lo and behold, they make the Final Four. And then you were like, okay, we can pump the brakes. UConn's a lot better. Jordan Hawkins is great. And I was like, no, Miami. But that's why this is a good duo. You have to rein me in when I get a little too dart happy. But a great time. I'm very happy to welcome you back and to sort of open my 2024 draft coverage by talking about the ACC and the many interesting darts, both obvious and subtle, that lie therein. So before we get to all of them, because there's a big list, in this first week, that you've gotten to really grind through tape. By the way, your Twitter is at @BGeis_bird. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
BGEIS_BIRD. Your analysis is second to none. You're uploading clips all the time and breaking them down. Great X's and O's work. But if there's one big takeaway from ACC coverage this first week, what would it be for you?
There were 2 that really jumped out to me. And by the way, I was beaming proudly when Jordan Miller was drafted. Like that made me that was maybe the happiest I was at any point the night of the 2023 draft, was seeing that guy get that guy get picked. And I know you were a big fan of Jordan Miller too.
Oh, by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt. I have a quick story that this is a Dart exclusive.
All right, let's
So
hear it.
I went to Summer League this year for the first time, which was a blast. I'd never been.
Cool.
And I was
Very
watching a Clippers game, and Jordan was playing. He was playing pretty well. And I was sitting what turns out to be like, I don't know, a handful of rows behind, I guess, his family, because they like had his jersey. They were cheering him on. They seemed like lovely people. Jordan hit a three, and his, I guess it's his dad, is who I'm assuming is his dad, goes, "That's my son. That's my son." And then he goes, "And I have to go to the bathroom." And he just went and walked on. I was like, Jordan Miller at like Hall of Fame, book it. What perfect
amazing
vibes, you know?
I love that. I love that. And look, amazing for the proud papa. And
of course.
Hope he made it to the bathroom in time. But
I'm sure he did.
The segue, I will brought that up in part also to segue, because it has been very fun. It's just been 2 games. We all know that this is a small sample, so you know we're extrapolating off not a ton of information, at least off this current season, but it has been seeing Matthew Cleveland, former 5-star recruit out of Atlanta, 2 years at Florida State, which were some good moments, and he played really well at times last season. I got to ask Leonard Hamilton about him after after the Duke FSU game last year. Leonard spoke glowingly about him and his development. He ends up at Miami, and right now he's basically playing the Jordan Miller role for them.
Yes.
Like they've got him at the small ball 4 spot, and the pieces fit so well. Like, name me a cooler starting 5 in college basketball than Pack, Joseph, Wooga Poplar, Matthew Cleveland, and Norchad Omier. It's a couple, smaller guards, and then just 3, 6, 7 guys that can fly and have different sort of strengths in terms of physicality, strength, length, leaping ability. And I love the role for Cleveland. Like, I think it was maybe even their first possession of the season. They start 5 out with Omier initiating, as they have done countless times the last 2 seasons. It ends up with Omier in the post, double team comes, Matthew Cleveland baseline cut for a finish at the rim. I think Cleveland is a sneaky good cutter. I've loved him as a transition finisher for a couple of years now too. And he seems like a guy that could just feast on those kinds of scavenger points, just like moving without the ball, being in the right spot at the right time, playing off of guys like Omier. And then for a couple of years now, the question with Cleveland has been, well, where does the jump shot, like the spot up, the catch and shoot 3, where does it land? And he improved last season after sort of a pretty tough freshman year. Granted, not a ton of volume, but shot it okay on low volume last year. It's very obvious that he's going to get looks in this system, with how they're playing 5 out, with him being the 3rd, 4th option kind of now, being probably lower in the pecking order than he was at FSU. And also Miami's a team that does a lot of sort of 77 double high ball screens with Omier and whomever's playing 4 off in Matthew Cleveland, because they rarely play 2 true big guys. They occasionally do it where they'll play AJKC with Omier. They do that very briefly in the Central Florida game, and actually it went poorly, and Coach L had to call a timeout and get Cleveland back in the game. And just those pop actions, those slip actions for Cleveland, he's just gonna get catch and shoot looks. And so I'm curious to see if he steps in and takes those shots with confidence this year, and if he's able to knock those down. So that's been sort of one of my biggest things that I've noticed early on this year. And we can talk more about Miami, but if I could just pick up, sort of move to one other thing on a different team.
Sure.
I've watched the first 2 Virginia games against Tarleton State, and then a big win they had in Charlotte last Friday against Florida, and what was a pretty fun early season game. Reece Beekman looks healthy. He looks very, very good. I've been high on Beekman since he set foot in Charlottesville. I think he's a pro. But just Virginia's half-court offense this season so far, it's early on, but they've got, along with now Isaac McNeely, who is a sophomore, big-time shooter, can really shoot coming off of pin downs and flares. They went out and got from St. Thomas Andrew Rohde. Probably not the same kind of shooter that McNeely is, but he can shoot. He can play with the ball. He can pass. He's got 6'5", 6'6" guard who can handle and shoot. McNeely has good size. Beekman is like not an amazing shooter, but is certainly capable. He can shoot a little bit off of movement. And Beekman is an excellent short space playmaker. He's excellent curling those down screens in Virginia's base offense. And so all of a sudden, when they get to this blocker mover, which again is sort of like the base offense for them, they've mixed some other stuff in, including just some spread pick and roll with Beekman. They all of a sudden have like the sort of like necessary like three guys that can threaten as drivers, shooters, and passers. And then one of the blockers is Ryan Dunn, who's a really exciting sophomore forward, one of the best athletes and front court defenders, team defenders in the ACC. And in the 5 spot, they're shaking it up either as Jacob Groves, who's like a pick and pop 5 transferred in from Oklahoma, or Blake Buchanan, who I don't think is like a one and done, but is probably, I think, has the chance to be a future pro coming out of the center position, has been pretty solid through 2 games for UVA. So just Virginia has a really balanced offense with like, I think as much sort of like collective shooting and playmaking as they've had in a few years. And they've got some pros and some like legit prospects on the roster that I think should make for a compelling UVA team. So those are sort of the 2 bigger things that I had like unearthed the first week of the season with the ACC.
All right, tremendous. Then why don't we could go in either direction, but since Virginia played Florida, we won't go into all of Florida's players, but though Duke played Arizona, and that was a good game that Arizona won at Cameron, that Virginia-Florida game, in my opinion, was better and had in at least as many future pros on the floor, right around the same number, if not. So I will say that in that game, well, I'll kick it back to you first. So Beekman went through the draft sort of process last year, went to the combine, scrimmage, did the whole thing. Got the feedback that, he likely wasn't getting a guaranteed deal or, wasn't going to get the shot exactly that he wanted with the right level of guarantee. And so he comes back, and with Kihei Clark gone, he's going to be like his usage is going to be expected to rise. He's always been one of the best perimeter defenders really in the country since he was a freshman. And the question for a kid who's 6'2" and who's kind of skinny is how consistently are you going to threaten on offense? So how do you think he looked in that game? We can say on each side of the ball, because his defensive assignment more often than not was on Walter Clayton Jr., who is a transfer from Iona at Florida, who is a hell of a prospect in his own right. So balancing sort of the burden on offense, did you see any drop off in his defensive tape, and how do you think he held up as an offensive threat in that game?
I thought he had like maybe 1 or 2 sort of like breakdowns where either he sort of like funneled a driver in the wrong way, and there was another time I think Clayton got him for like a back cut layup. Beekman is pretty aggressive in terms of his off-ball denial, but I thought he was awesome defensively. If he's healthy, and he was injured for a good chunk of last season too. So maybe that even was a part of like the evaluation process where teams said, hey, let us see you be healthy and do this stuff for a full season or whatever. Maybe not. But with how Virginia wants to guard the post, they don't double the post on every single touch, but they do it a lot. They've done it a lot so far this season. And whenever they send that post double, it's always the 4 and 5 who are doing it. And Beekman is so freaking good at being on the backside of those actions and being in passing lanes. Like the rep for Beekman is he's this elite point of attack defender and screen navigator, despite the fact that he is skinny. And he is like, he very much is that. Like he's excellent at doing all of those things, but he is like Deion Sanders style in passing lanes, breaking on cross court skips. Like he's just like a phantom, like just appearing in different spots over the court. And when if I could close my eyes and like think of like the archetypal Reece Beekman play over what is now year 4 in Charlottesville, it would be like the pick 6 slam dunk, like him in a passing lane. Whether it's like he's one pass away denying it and he just gets an arm out faster than the guy passing the ball thinks he should be able to, or it's a post double, the opposing 4 or 5 is trying to skip it weak side to a shooter. They just don't see Beekman. And he springs up seemingly out of nowhere and picks it off and is off to the races the other direction. Just an amazing off-ball defender. And his steals numbers speak for himself, but if you seriously sit down and if you haven't seen Beekman play before and really watched him, seriously sit down and watch 2 or 3 full games. That isn't probably enough. And you'll sort of just, in my opinion, he is a truly, truly special defender. Offensively, he's always been a little the offense has come together and I think it's improved a lot. He was such a low usage guy that first year when they had Trey Murphy III, Sam Hauser, Jay Huff, this incredible combination of very tall shooters. That team could have really used senior year Reece Beekman to be the guy that can crack a defense with the dribble, get to the rim. He's made big strides in terms of his pick and roll creation. I think he's become a better finisher at the rim. He is still pretty dependent on his right hand to finish through contact. And he is still because he is still a little on the skinny side, contact can also bother him. I have seen him dunk on guys in the half court. He does have the ability to play above the rim. Obviously, most of his dunks come in transition, but I have seen him throw down in the half court. He's capable of doing that. And I do think he's still pretty right-handed dependent throwing passes. You'll see him even if he runs pick and roll and he's trying to throw the pass to a guy that's sealing or diving to his left. You'll often see him have to pick, if he's dribbling right, he'll have to pick up his dribble and sort of swing his body back and then throw that pass with his right hand. Not every time. He actually threw a pretty nice sort of leading pass to Ryan Dunn on a dive in the Florida game with his left hand that I thought was pretty impressive. But for the most part, pretty right hand dependent. Never going to be an amazing at the rim finisher, but he's gotten better. And the thing that I really like about his offense, I think one of my favorite parts about his offense is Virginia has so much off-ball motion in the blocker mover offense. And you would think for a guy like Beekman, he would probably want to just run 50 pick and rolls per game, but he doesn't just, spread pick and roll, 1-5 flat or whatever, but he's so good at using those empty side pin downs to curl and get downhill and sort of sprint into these manufactured 2-on-1, situations. And he's very, very good at catching in space, curling. His footwork is so good. We don't think of Beekman as a big time movement shooter because that's not really what he does best, but he's an excellent off ball mover. And he's so good at curling and quickly shifting and getting downhill, pretty special. And I think his decision making when he comes off of those screens is as good as anybody you'll find in the country. So he's a weird guy to project to the next level because the defense is special and it's going to be his ticket to the dance, and I think he can shoot it enough off the catch to be somewhat of a threat to make him playable defensively. That remains to be seen, but I'll bet on that. I'll bet on that shot just enough. But it's sort of what does he do with the ball or when he's not spotting up? And I think he has the chance to be a swing sort of secondary pick and roll or a guy you could see starting in the corner and you're running him off a dribble handoff into Zoom or Chicago action if you're playing 5 out and letting him, go off the pin down into the handoff, try to turn the corner, get downhill. I think he has the chance to have some utility as a Bruce Brown style, guard screener, let him slip into space and sort of make plays. And I think he has some nice short space playmaking stuff. I've probably mentioned this thought about him before. It's not like a new thought I've had.
Okay,
So
it's okay.
so
Yeah, you've
yeah,
soliloquized about him before on
yeah.
my podcast.
I
I
think
knew
I
what I
hit.
was getting into, Brian.
I think so. So again, special defender, amazing in passing lanes, unbelievably quick hands. Like he's got just if you're driving, if he's an off-ball defender, you're driving in his direction. He is a menace, stunting, lunging out and getting sort of like rip steals that way. And this is also sort of like a subjective niche analysis here. I think it's harder to find another guy who blocks more shots where the guy going up to shoot the ball, the basketball is actually like below their chin. Like he blocks so many shots when the ball is like on the way up, not like fully above head, because he's able to clamp and just get right on top of it with his hands. And like sometimes it looks like a steal, sometimes it looks like a block. Often they're scored blocks, and it is funny sometimes when you watch him play and then go through like the play-by-play data afterwards to see like what got scored what. But he gets a lot of like blocks just doing that type of stuff. So I thought he was excellent in that Florida game. I thought at times he was maybe the best player on the court. And it's just good to see him healthy and getting to like sort of not play helio ball, because that's never going to be a thing for Virginia, but like get more time on the basketball without Kihei Clark and like more shooters around him. Ryan Dunn is sort of like, trying to shoot threes. Hasn't really happened yet, but at least when they play Jake Groves at the 5 spot, he's a big time shooter. And so all of a sudden they can have Beekman, McNeely, Rhodey, Groves spacing the floor, and then Ryan Dunn gets to be like the screen and dive guy. So I like the way the pieces fit, and I thought Beekman has been outstanding through the first 2 games this season.
Yeah. I did not watch their first game, but I watched that Florida game. And what I was watching for with him was, I remember both watching him last year in general and watching him during the combine scrimmages. And I think the reason why he maybe didn't play badly, but the reason he wasn't one of the, 3 best players on the court or whatever at any given time was the finishing issue that you mentioned. Because, when you're playing essentially pickup with a bunch of NBA prospects, everyone is going to try to show why they're an NBA athlete and try to get to the cup and finish, unless they're, Seth Lundy and they're a shooting specialist. And so that Florida game was interesting, and I think overall encouraging. I think in the first half of that game, he showed an ability, first of all, to get into the paint very frequently. Getting the paint touch for him was not much of a problem, whether it was in one of the actions that you mentioned where he's curling off that pin down, or it was a traditional pick and roll. He's one of these players who is so high feel on both sides of the ball that he understands, for a guy his size, he needs the little extra boost of like catching on the move already, not going from a standstill to try to pick up any little advantage that he can. And since Clayton, as mention him again, Walter Clayton Jr. is such a good athlete guarding him, I thought it was a positive sign how frequently he was able to get into the paint. Finishing the actual shots, I think maybe he was like 50% at the rim, like nothing crazy, but they were all very close. It didn't look to me like his shot was very altered at the rim, and he was getting enough lift on his shot that he was able to get it over, I think, Micah Hanlockton is that guy's name?
Hanlockton. He's from North Carolina, actually, I believe.
So who's a 7-foot center transfer from Marshall, very active, pretty mobile, like a double threat any given night. But like the point being, a legitimate D1, like high conference rim deterrent player, clearly. And Beekman was still getting, I think, pretty decent looks. In the second half, when he would get into the paint, he sort of reverted to what he's been at Virginia before in those spots, which is, he'd drive in, but if there was someone there to meet him, he would be dishing out and he would be looking to kick off of his drives, which is something that, sometimes it worked for Virginia. Like you said, they have better surrounding shooting talent now. And so on a couple of those possessions, they were still able to score. But if he's going to go to the next level, he can't make the decision so quickly that my layup attempt has been deterred and we're going to reset. Because it's not as though he was passing out of like an advantage necessarily. He was passing because he didn't want to drive anymore. And so Florida's an athletic team, very athletic team. So this was a real test. And I think because the game was really close, like this was a nip and tuck game. Virginia ended up winning, by the way, but this was a nip and tuck game throughout the second half. I think when that pressure ratcheted up is when he sort of reverted, but it's a long season. And I think that it's an area where you can expect growth and be encouraged by an early season matchup such as this.
Yep.
I think for Dunn, who is someone I was not as acquainted with, he is a 6'8", probably a little over 200-pound front court wing / big, breathtaking talent as a defender, just as like a physical talent who can switch onto all manner of players, affect all kinds of shots, and do so with a Tony Bennett, instilled polish to his game. I saw him like maybe get out of position a couple of times, but for the most part, if he was on the court and he was involved in the action, nothing good happened for Riley Kugel, who's going to be a first round pick, or Clayton, or Will Richard, Tyrese Evans. He bothered them all, really bothered them all. And so the question with him is going to be a shot, who knows? And I would think that Dunn's going to be at this is not going to be his last year at Virginia. I'd be surprised if he averages more than 10 points a game this year. So he'll come back next year. This probably won't be the last time we discuss him on the podcast. But when you mentioned he's one of the best front court, / wing defenders in the ACC, I actually think, that even might be a bit modest for the level of defensive talent that he has. I was so impressed with him. So wanted to mention him as well in a bit more detail.
He's an incredible weak side rim protector. Like I watched, I think watched and clipped probably all but one or two UVA games last year. And it was amazing because his blocks per minutes per possession numbers were out of control. So many of them were like help rotations at the rim. Like he's got real weak side, low man, rim protecting upside, like real big time potential there. He's so long. He had a transition dunk in the game against Florida that I had to rewind watching the film on my computer, because like he unfurled like all of his limbs at the same time, and it was like, whoa, he's flying through the air like that. Holy crap. But in that, like the 4-man, which is basically what he's playing the vast majority of the time for Tony Bennett, is a huge role in that pack line defensive system, because he has so many responsibilities as like a help defender, because they use him to switch some, but often he still has to go out and hedge ball screens and recover. Right.
Yes.
So there is a like positional awareness in ground coverage component and like trust of the players around him. And having he and Beekman and Dante Harris, the guy who transferred in from Georgetown, they've got sick defensive personnel. Like Virginia's got really special talent out there. And Beekman and Dunn might just be like the two best defenders in the ACC, like regardless of a position.
Yeah. And it didn't look to me like, again, this is characteristic of Tony Bennett, but like you get really good. So like, I love Tari Eason. Tari, doing very well on the Rockets, the upstart Rockets. And he was a menace, predatory defender at LSU, but he would also like get into foul trouble because he was so aggressive. And I thought for his pro prospects, that wasn't necessarily a problem, but like within the flow of a given game, he could sometimes, play himself out of the game with how aggressive he was.
Yeah.
Dunn plays very aggressive, but he just one game, but he didn't strike me as someone who was, out of position or who was seeing anything that he couldn't diagnose and react to with proper technique very quickly.
Yeah.
There was a transition possession with Walter Clayton. And for those who don't know about Walter, he was offered by Florida and Georgia to play football coming out of high school and made the decision to pursue basketball instead, went to Iona, is now transferring to Florida. Great shooting talent. I think he shot like 95% on free throws last year.
Yes, he did.
And he has this, this football body. He's 6'2", 6'3", just made out of granite with great burst, great leaping ability.
Florida's 3 starters on the perimeter are all jacked. Like Kugel and Will Richard too. All of them are tanks.
And so Clayton is driving on this transition attempt, and Dunn is like measuring him, trying to catch up to chase down or whatever, or at least to contest at the rim vertically. And you're thinking, well, Clayton's this insane athlete. Like, he's going up, he's going to get fouled. And they called a foul, but I think they called it because the way that Dunn corralled and dismissed this shot was so startling. They're like, that just happened to Walter Clayton. No one can. It's impossible that happened to that player. That must have been illegal in some way in a foul. Mm-hmm. There is no review, like whatever. It didn't look like a foul to me, but it was he just baptized the ball right out of Walter's hands.
He'll have
that was like, my reaction to that was your reaction to his dunk. I went, oh my goodness. That is insane.
He'll have 1 or 2 of those plays per game. It was their second game last season. They played Monmouth. I didn't know much about him other than that he was like a decent recruit, forward. And he played, I think he had 3 steals, 2 blocks. It was he had he made a bunch of crazy hustle plays. And I remember tweeting after that game being like, Ryan Dunn looks pretty good. Not bad from the freshman. And he was sort of like on the fringes, and then Bennett had to put him in there and probably should have played him some more, towards the end of last season. But the stuff that the UVA defense for years has been an elite defense, but has never been an elite defense because it generated a lot of blocks and steals. It has sort of been known for artificially deflating those types of numbers. This was a big conversation around DeAndre Hunter leading into the 2019 draft. Why does this freak 6'8", 235-pound forward with a 7 whatever wingspan, why does he have a steal rate of 1.7%? Can someone explain this to me? That's why it's also wild when you see the stocks numbers that Beekman has put up for years now, and that Dunn is in the process of putting up now too, because those guys are playing textbook pack line defense for their role, but they're just so good. Beekman, such high feel, such quick hands, so savvy in passing lanes, so good navigating screens, and Dunn just technique and limbs flying in every direction, that they are bucking the system to create these events defensively. And again, Dunn is also the guy that's going to be responsible for doubling out of the post often and recovering back. If you're assuming that the opposing center is going to be the primary ball screener for the opposing offense, that means the 5-man Jake Groves or Blake Buchanan are going to be the ones out hedging screens. Well, that means Dunn's going to he's the tallest guy on the backside, having to zone up basically, and be the guy that's being able to check out the guy that's rolling to the hoop, staying on his guy, his ability to kind of be in 2 places at one time and put out fires. It just, he profiles as a guy that if and when the shot comes along, he could be a guy that just puts out a lot of fires for an NBA defense. Do you know what I mean? Just
sure.
Whatever the coverage is, he seems like a guy that is destined to just make a ton of plays on the backside. They ask him to do a lot defensively, and he's very impactful in whatever role they ask him to play.
And I will say, when you talk about the shot coming along or not coming along, they were talking on commentary about how that's his focus. I'm sure he's been told a million times that, you're a jumper away from being a legitimate NBA prospect. I would like to see him, and it's unfair to compare him to Tari. Tari's a very unique player, but Tari, his jumper came along at LSU, but he was just as aggressive off the dribble, initiating contact, getting to the line, offensive rebounds, just finding ways to make sure that he was like affecting the game with the ball in his hands. And because a lot of Virginia's offense can be very scripted, very, manicured. I am hoping that Dunn doesn't just think he has to spot up in the corner and that's all he's there to do. I want to be able to see him attack closeout, because like when you're that athletic, if you're not attacking closeouts and seeing how you can finish, that's a waste of your athleticism. Not to mention that the NBA is such an offensively tilted league that you're going to need to have some diversity there anyway. So I'm looking for that for him. And I'll say that just a couple names to keep in mind for Beekman in terms of defensive talent and sort of play type in the NBA. The really nice end of this spectrum is someone like Alex Caruso, first team all defense player.
They show up in a lot of filters together, by the way, too. If you do defensive BPM, steal rate of it, like right, Caruso and Beekman,
Caruso had a
Marcus Smart. Yeah, they all show up. Melton, they show up in these similar categories.
Melton as well. Steal rates through the roof, assist percentage through the roof, ATO very, very high. Melton is more of a physical comp for Beekman than Caruso is. I mean, Caruso is a tank himself, at 6'4", 6'5".
Yeah.
Matisse Thybulle is not an initiating guard. Never was that playmaker as a guard, but in terms of the quality of his hand placement, his anticipation, Beekman is in that conversation with him. There's a kid on the Cavs right now, Craig Porter Jr., who went to Wichita State. Porter's a better athlete than Beekman because he's a better athlete than basically anyone, and can, has gunpowder in his legs, rotating, on the baseline for weak side blocks. And also a good distributor himself. But Porter's never going to have the problem of, being able to, I'm not going to say that Porter's going to be a great NBA finisher. He just got into the league. He's just getting his cup of coffee, but he has the athleticism to last in that department and to not wash out of the league because he can't get to the hoop. Beekman, that's the area that he has to focus on. I think with the exception maybe of Caruso, he does certain things as well or better than all of these guys, but it takes a lot to get and stick in the league. Melton is shooting 38-39% from three on NBA threes for a 1 seed right now. So it's very, very hard. It's one thing to have a profile. It's another thing to stick. So, but very, very exciting players for Virginia. Go ahead.
Last two quick things.
Go ahead.
One about Beekman, one about Dunn. What I've noticed so far early in the season, and this is one of the reasons why I think the shooting on the wing spots for UVA is so big, because when they get into that base continuity motion blocker mover offense, you could see this happened a couple times against Florida. When Beekman did get downhill, it happened against Tarleton State too. When they have those side screens, the flare and the pin down happening at the same time, and they've got it spaced out enough, the lane can be open. And you've seen a couple of times Beekman has been I can just isolate. I can one crossover and I can get by this guy. And so it's been nice. That wasn't the case Beekman's sophomore year, when you're trying to do this with Kihei Clark and Armand Franklin, who, could not shoot that season. All of a sudden, you're just seeing a wider lane for him. And it's been encouraging to see him attack that space. And then my hope for Dunn would be, one of the things that DeAndre Hunter got good at was in that blocker mover, when they do those empty side pin downs, those empty side flares, it turns into pick and pop situations for the player coming off the screen. And so Dunn's going to often be the one setting the screen. And if it's guys like McNeely, Beekman, Rhodey, they're either shooters or playmakers coming off those screens. And so if you can get opponents to put two on the ball, that's going to get Dunn open for pops, hopefully able to, catch and go and get downhill too. So he should have maybe not as many opportunities as we would probably like, but there will be some there within the continuity flow of the offense. When I get worried a little bit is when UVA goes to its inside motion triangle offense, which is what they did a lot 3 seasons ago with Murphy, Hauser and Huff. They did it a lot last season too. It's much more random, just sort of like three guys in the middle, sort of like setting different screens, cutting from one another. They'll throw into the post, play out of the post, some in that too. But when they do that, they're often keeping the two other guys on the wing, just sort of like standing there. And this unfortunately happened a lot with Trey Murphy, where like he's this incredible player, and he'd be helping space the floor, but he would just be like not involved in the action. And you're also seeing that with Dunn, obviously not the shooter that Trey Murphy the third is. Of course, few people like on planet Earth are, but Dunn sometimes on those looks will just be like standing on the wing, and it's early. Maybe they're able to get him involved in that, use him as a post guy to throw pass out of the post or as a cutter, but just like he'll just be standing there, and they're not really throwing it to him. And even if they did kick it out, because the middle is sort of like congested, because that's where all the screening actions are, it's not really like a closeout beat situation either. So like,
right.
It's just there are some of their base packages. I kind of like some of the opportunities that will present themselves for Dunn so far. There's some that are like a little bit, he just becomes like not just secondary, like kind of an afterthought. And I'm hoping they can find some ways to blend that. They will occasionally launch like side pick and roll out of that. And like, maybe that's a way to get Dunn kind of going downhill a little bit out of some of those inside motion sets. So anyways, I digress as far as UVA goes, but Dunn and Beekman, two prospects I'm very high on.
I don't know if when we talk, Brian, I don't know if there's a such thing as like a digression. You have to be like on a path to begin with in order to digress from it.
That's a good point.
But let's go back to Miami. Okay. So 2 years ago, they beat Auburn, Walker Kessler, Jabari Smith, March Madness. They go to the Elite Eight.
What a game that was too, man. Awesome.
Last year they beat 1 seed Houston, Jarris Walker and
Marcus Sasser.
Sasser, of course, Jamal Shed. And they end up in the Final Four. They beat Texas. Jordan Miller goes, 7 for 7 from the field, 13 of 13 from the line. They win that game.
Yeah.
I saw this. They're ranked 13th. They opened it ranked 13th, and I saw it was like a major publication or like a major person working for a publication who was like, that's kind of an aggressive ranking for Miami, don't you think? And I was like, look, I am less familiar with the landscape of college basketball at this stage than you are or than a professional is. But I was like, if they have Nigel Pack, Wooga, and Norchad Omier, I'm not sweating that they're a top 15 team in the country. And I have loved Wooga since the middle of last year. This is a kid who is 20 years old now, was 19 last year, turns 21 in January. Probably sick, no matter what he's listed, he's probably in the 6'3" range as a guard. And with an expanded opportunity last year, really secured a role for himself as a slasher and as a shooter. And early this year in 2 games, he's been absolutely on fire. I think I charted that he scored 46 points on 24 shots or something like that. Was 5 for 5 for 3 in their second game. And his jumper, when he's able to catch and shoot, his range is very deep, number one. And it's basically a one motion shot. It is very hard to have a release that smooth and that quick. Not many people can do it, but he can. And despite his height, he can shoot it over contests and get it off, quickly. And he's got a great first step, really good burst, can elevate and can, curl off of similar actions you're talking about with Reece coming off of the pin down, can catch and square his shoulders and get up and hit that shot. So to me, Wooga is an abundantly clear NBA prospect, and will make that increasingly clear this year. Norchad, who is this initiator, DHO initiator, and just 5-out initiator for them, he plays with as high a motor and plays as hard as anyone in the country. can really switch, can hedge screens and recover down to the rim. That game against Houston was a masterclass from him. Hellacious rebounder, and has some shooting touch himself. I am of the opinion that Norchad is also an NBA prospect. He will have to shoot threes, as everyone this day and age do, but he does not have a hopeless jumper. He's not someone where the three is just a pipe dream. So his defensive versatility, Wooga's shot and just slashing, I think they can find places. What do you think about them and about this team and like maybe an aspiration to return, to deep March territory?
Yeah. By the way, I just pulled up Miami's box score from FIU tonight. Wooga starting the season now 14. He was 4 of 6 from deep tonight. So
was he?
He's now 14 of 20 from 3 to start the season and 8 of 8 at the line. So it seems pretty good, you guys.
Wooga.
Matthew Cleveland 3 of 3 from deep. In this game as well. So yeah, the usual suspects were out doing good work tonight, but good to see Matthew Cleveland get up 3 threes and make all of them. Yeah, I mean, I love Poplar. Like I think he's a pretty sick prospect. Like he's an incredible athlete. The game of theirs that I watched earlier this morning, the Central Florida game, late in the stages of that game, he blocked a three, a Jalen Sellers 3-point attempt where the shot came right in front of him. Usually when you see, block threes, it's like late clock or like it's a help rotation or something like that. They're pretty rare, like in general. It is not that often that you see a 6'6" guy just sort of like jump straight up and block the guy in front of him as he's shooting a three. So I love the length. I love the quick hands. And the release with that athleticism is like a pretty awesome combination. Like that kind of like power athlete with that kind of sweet stroke is really appealing. And like, he's not just a catch and shoot guy. When we talked about Poplar last year, I brought up like how much I loved his catch and go game. And like, he can really rock and roll. Like he really can, pump and go and get downhill and again, then use all that athleticism and size to finish in the paint. So like the more he keeps shooting it like this, like obviously that's good because threes are great and it means a lot for his like prospect profile. But it opens up his downhill drive game, which can also turn into some of his secondary creation game too. Yeah. So I really like Poplar in terms of that. And in the Central Florida game that I watched too, they ran floppy action twice in that game. One time out of a baseline out of bounds play, another time just sort of like an after timeout set. And it's cool because they can have Bensley Joseph run the point and then they can take Poplar and Pack. Two big time shooters. I mean, Pack is like on year 3 being just like year 3 or 4 being like one of the best bombers, off the dribble, off the catch.
Be a clear NBA prospect if he were 3 inches taller.
Yeah, it'd be same. I like just he'll never finish inside. Like he'll never finish inside the paint. I wish he was like maybe a little bit quicker too, but regardless, a big time shooter. And on one of the little like floppy actions they went to out of the baseline out of bounds set, he curled a screen for Matthew Cleveland, and Central Florida had 2 on the ball. And I mean, was again with that athleticism, catching, getting in the air, and then slipping the dot, like the little like pass, not pocket pass, but the pass to Cleveland on the sort of like pin down dive action. Like it's cool to see that, in part because those are 2 awesome players, like leveraging their talents together in ways that benefit both guys, which is wonderful to see. Miami's offense, even like 3 years ago, was so pick and roll heavy. They were up there with NC State just in terms of like they would just smash the pick and roll button with Chris Likes and Isaiah Wong, and it was just what they did. And they now are so 5 out, which they used to get into a lot of pick and roll, but it's also cool to see them mixing in some of these off-ball actions for guys like Pack, guys like Poplar, leveraging their skills off of one another, and then blending that with like the screening and cutting talents of Omier and Cleveland. I really, really like that. Norchad is one of the strongest players in the country, like, period. He's an absolute, I mean, too often, like, cross sport analogies are made to describe something, but like, he really does look like a tight end or a defensive end playing football. Like, that's kind of like how he plays. He's super physical. You can see that he bothers guys in the ACC, like big time veteran ACC front court players that are like, taller, maybe even outweigh him at times too, because he's sort of undersized, but he's so strong. I love the fact that like he has become a really good like initiator of actions. That's something that's like not a lot of college centers get to do. Like, Miami starts, I don't know if it's a majority, it's probably like a plurality of their possessions are like Omier like initiating, like him catching, like Pack throwing him the ball, then Omier going into a DHO on the opposite side of the court. I kind of like that, his ability to move as like a short roll playmaker. He can play at the nail. So he's got some of those sort of like interior passing, finishing stuff that I think is kind of useful. That isn't just like the scoring. He's not just like using the mid range to just get to get buckets. Like, he can make plays out of it. And he can score in a lot of different ways. It's not just like feasting on guys in the post. And they ask him, Miami's defense, if they have like one sort of like fatal flaw, it's that they're like, these last couple of years, they have not been a great defensive team. And they just lean on their size and speed and athleticism. And they have Omier. I mean, they hedge and blitz ball screens a ton. Not every time, he'll be at the level. Sometimes he can switch, but really it's like a hard hedge or a blitz and like recover. And they're trying to generate steals, that's done to force turnovers. And he's a force doing that. And he's a force at hedging and recovering. And like, again, they're kind of small. And so then when he hedges, then they're very small along the backside. They're asking Cleveland and Poplar to clean stuff up, but he's really good at getting out, recovering, getting back. And like, he'll just all motor at 100% all game too.
Yeah. If you imagine, and I'm not comparing him to this player in terms of NBA future skill set, but if you imagine how much the Miami Heat rely on Bam Adebayo defensively for how much ground he can cover and doing a lot of the things you're talking about. I mean, Miami relies on Norchad to a similar degree, and he plays with a similar strength and, motor and passion. I love Norchad. I'm going to love watching him all year. And your point about the just sort of the synergy within the Miami offense, I'm not going to say it's underrated or whatever, because I think people know, but it bears repeating that playing in an offense that plays with a lot of pace and plays with a lot of like NBA action, a lot of 5-out DHO action, is so beneficial for the players who have a real NBA chance. It's so beneficial for their development. Like, speaking again about the 2024 draft and how it's perceived to be so bad, time will tell on that. To me, when I hear that, I get excited because it means that I will be able to find people I like. I know that I will. And in Miami's case, like, oftentimes a draft is judged in the present moment, not in retrospect, but in the present moment, based on like, well, what one and done studs are there that are gonna be all-stars in like 3 years or whatever. They use it's very short-term focused about who's gonna pop immediately, at age 19 or 20. But the way the league's going now, I mean, there's just an increasing the bar to how much you need to know how to do and how physical you need to be right away keeps rising and rising. That's what happens when you flood a league with a lot of talent. Like the NBA, I think as recently as a few years ago, it was commonly referred to as like the best developmental league in the world because you have so much space and you have so much offensive talent around you. But the best developmental league in the world presupposes that they just have the minutes to hand out to players who need development. And that's not the case in the NBA anymore. You now, even as a rookie, need to have something that you can do that is going to help a team. And for a guy like Wooga, you could say, like, I shoot threes. Well, everybody shoots threes. But if you now can make secondary playmaking reads and you know how to cut off and like play on the other side of a DHO, then teams can start to envision you more smoothly as part of like a bench unit or whatever early in your career. Norchad clearly, a similar sort of thing. For Cleveland, who, bless Leonard Hamilton. We all love Leonard, but Florida State is not an ideally spaced place. Never really has been under Leonard because he likes defensive versatility and he likes recruiting like these incredibly athletic wing types. And lots of times, the offense can bog down. But for Cleveland to be in an offense like this, with this degree of space and, playmaking on it, I think if he's going to get an NBA shot, it's because he transferred here and is going to get to have a year here, not just being a play finisher. I mean, he'll do a lot of play finishing, but if he's going to develop his vision at all, it needs to be in an egalitarian system like this. So I cannot wait to watch more of them, especially if Wooga continues to shoot, 72% from three. But like I think that, again, the narrative about college basketball is there's always all these transfers and no team stays together and who can keep track of what and blah, blah, blah. This is a team with a clear identity about how they want to play. Virginia, too, for that matter, a clear identity for how they want to play. In Miami's case, a track record, multiple years of success deep in March. They have a core now, a 3-man core that has done that trip. And like they're just ready to go. Like I think they had a sellout their first game against UCF. Like they are ready to go, and they can play with absolutely anybody in the country, in my opinion.
They can, because they can score. And I do think it's going to be important for them to figure out like what they have off the bench. There's some intriguing pieces. I kind of like Keyshawn George, the freshman. What I've seen of him a little bit. We'll see about AJ Casey and Michael Nwoko, like if one of those guys sort of like can show up as like the backup 5, because the one thing I worry about with them, just as like a college team, like their splits last year with Norchad were so violent. Like, and just because they're so 5-out heavy offensively, and because he is so critical for them, like hedging screens and like being like a strong, stout, like vertical presence, contesting shots at the rim. Like you pull that piece off and all of a sudden, like it just nothing works quite as well, unless they like, last season they would just play like they could play Miller, make him like the handoff hub, and that could still kind of help. But like, you may not have that this year with Cleveland or with Poplar. And they don't have like Isaiah Wong's just like weird, funky shot making to sort of like just like pull them out of a hole,
bail them out
in a pinch. And this is just stating the obvious, but like the Leonard Hamilton FSU, like I think the reason why they've been like an NBA factory, one has just been like they recruit incredibly tall and long athletes, but like it's like a culture thing there too. Do you know what I mean? Like it is the FSU culture thing. And if there was sort of like one schematic thing that I do think helps going to FSU, because they are so switch heavy, I do think it helps certain guys understand like backside rotations when they have, like if there's a switch and all of a sudden there's a guard in the post guarding a big guy, well, then the opposite wing is like, okay, I need to be shading over. Devin Vassell was so good at doing that when he was at FSU. And so like, I do think if I was sort of the like, in terms of their scheme, like what is beneficial, because the offense is pretty, it is what it is. But defensively, I do think guys get put into positions where they have to sort of like scratch skills that end up becoming valuable to them on the next level too.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And it's worth mentioning, as much as we love Wooga and as good an athlete as he is, he's not naturally, broad shouldered, look like he's going to put on a bunch of weight. He's probably going to be on the lighter side. That's what would separate. I mean, not the only thing that separates him, but like Donovan Mitchell, for example, as sort of I don't want to say undersized, but like shooting guard sized kind of guy who relies on nuclear scoring talent and hyper athleticism, he is a solid 210 pounds and was a tank by the time he left Louisville. And
yeah,
Poplar just is not built in the same fashion, which is why I don't think, barring an incredible shooting year, I don't think Wooga's going to get like lottery hype. I don't think that's where he's going, but I am optimistic that he will get plenty of first round consideration when the time comes, but time will tell. We will see.
That sounds about right to me.
Yeah. So you want to go to Duke, old reliable Duke? There's plenty to talk about there, or do you want to go to Pitt?
Let's do Duke, actually. Let's do Duke.
All right. So Duke had their own high profile game against Arizona over the weekend, which Arizona won, but it was a well contested game, pretty close throughout the vast majority, no lead really more than 5 or 7 points at any given time. And Kyle Filipowski, off of, I guess, sort of now highly publicized double hip surgery, shaving his hips down so that he could be more flex. But the commentators mentioned this like, oh, yeah, and thank goodness he got double hip surgery and he feels great. And then they threw in an anecdote where he's like, yeah, I couldn't move for 2 months. I needed teammates to help me move. And I was like, yeah, this is major surgery. Like this is not like
he sat out. Like, so I think it's funny that I saw people like Sam Vecini mentioned it in a piece in The Athletic, I think recently. And I saw people discussing it like in like draft Twitter circles. Like, I live and work in Tobacco, like along Tobacco Road, and like I am credentialed and cover Duke. So like I knew about this. I thought like kind of everyone knew about it. And like he sat out a lot. Like Mark Mitchell sat out a lot of offseason stuff too because of injury recovery. But yeah, Filipowski missed like big chunks of time for them this offseason because like, yeah, he just wasn't playing because of the hip surgery.
Yeah, and he's started out, double machine. He like his numbers have not really dropped off or anything. And I'm not at the point where I can go back to his tape last year and see how much more mobile he looks or anything. But
he was pretty mobile last year. Like that's
what I thought. And I didn't think he looked like a completely different guy.
Yeah.
It's whatever. Maybe with technology now, the way people can recover from surgery, especially at his age, it's like how kids get Tommy John when they're like 13 years old and then they go have careers in the major leagues. Or maybe it's not an awesome idea to get double hip surgery when you're 20 years old. Yeah. I don't know.
They've been calling him New Hip Flip around Duke. That's been the nickname this summer.
I mean, I don't know if that's cool or if that's sort of like an ironic name you call like an 80-year-old grandfather. Yeah. I don't know. But what I'll say is that in this game, Arizona has Omar Ballo, who's one of the, biggest, baddest, true fives in the country.
Massive and huge.
Yeah, massive man. And I thought that, Filipowski, one of the reasons he didn't get drafted last year is because his defensive role is very fuzzy in the NBA. Is he a 4? Is he a 5? How does he really protect the rim? I thought, early season test, but a test nonetheless. I did not see him being terribly, impactful in the post or deterring much. I think Arizona, which is full of college veterans, Caleb Love is still playing college, still playing at Cameron Indoor, still winning games there.
The full Caleb Love experience at Cameron the Friday night. It was like every part of it, the turnovers, the shooting, then like the clutch, it was everything in one game. It was honestly almost too much.
Pelle Larsson, Ballo himself, like they went right at Filipowski, and it's not as though Filipowski will ever shy away from physicality, quite the opposite, but it didn't contact. He didn't seem like he was providing the amount of resistance that you would hope to see from him. In watching that game, I just started to think like, man, Filipowski shot well from 3 in this game, by the way. But I was like, man, that 3 better go down. I think he shot lower than 30%, maybe right around 30% last year.
Yeah, on a
free
ton of
throw
volume.
magnet. Yeah. But he he better hit his threes, and because he loves contact so much, it's not as though when he's in the post, he has this balletic footwork that is constantly getting himself. He's not Jacob Timme. He's not getting himself these really easy looks because of how well he manipulates his defender. He's like, no, let's go. It's like right now, I'm coming right at you. I'm probably going to draw a foul. And it looks exhausting, especially for someone who just had double hip surgery. He seems like he gets tunnel vision a little bit when he decides to put his head down. And all of this it's just little paper cuts on his game to where it makes his role in the NBA fuzzier and fuzzier to me. Now, maybe again, overreaction to an early season game, but I feel like the developments I would want to see from him would need to be sort of pretty drastic would need to be pretty drastic for me to feel like he's a whatever lottery level talent, which is I'm sure what he wants to be. And I was higher on him last year because I saw the free throw rate and the production as a freshman, and he's going to have similar production, but I really need to see more of an all around impact in the game as opposed to spamming sort of the double points and rebounds. What did you think of him?
Yeah, it's been, I mean, he's playing a new position, really. Like he played about 100 minutes at 5 last year, like no Lively, no Ryan Young on the court, which is not like nothing, but it's for a guy who played in a lot of basketball last season. It's not a ton, you know? So this is a different role, and you know, John Shire wants to play a lot of like two posts on the court. So that was why Filipowski and Derek Lively last season. Now it's been a lot of like Filipowski, like Mark Mitchell, you know, or as like the de facto four. I mean, he was playing a lot of three last year, and they have all these great guards. So they're like, I see why they're playing the way they are, where they're playing 3-guard lineups with Tyrese Proctor, Jeremy Roach, Jared McCain, and then Mitchell, and then Filipowski. And you can see them like leaning into this, like, okay, well, we're going to play 5 out on offense. We're going to have all these great guards. We can initiate with Flip. They're doing a lot of like, you know, Miami style 5 out, you know, delay, or they throw it to Filipowski at the elbow. They're running split action off that. Filipowski hasn't, like, he can pass. Like, I think he's like a very capable short roll passer that hasn't really shown up so far this season, but he was quite good at it last year. I do think, even though maybe he's seeing like less people in the paint when he does that, I do think they're missing like the Derek Lively, like auto lob. Like anytime last season you caught it in space and it was like, what do I do with the ball? It was like, just throw it anywhere near the backboard. And like number one's going to probably try to get it. And like, that's the thing. It's like they have more spacing. They have more ball handling. They have more guys that can like touch the paint with a dribble. And they have so much like just skill that I think offensively they'll settle in. And I think a lot of the discussion on them missing like a rim running, like above the rim 5 has been discussed a lot in terms of like defense. And I think with reason, you know, Lively might be a defensive savant, and he papered over a lot of issues for them last season. And just like he and Proctor made them just like an elite defense, like two of those guys, Lively especially. I don't think it's been as discussed in terms of him being a pressure point on the rim for them, him being an offensive rebounder. Like Duke hasn't really gotten to the line much so far this season. It's just 2 games. They haven't really gotten on the offensive glass. And it just puts Filipowski sort of in different spots. I think eventually he'll start eating off of that space a little bit more. And when the doubles come, he'll have chances to make plays as a passer. But yeah, he is like very much like wants to play through contact. Like he's not like a, you know, incredible like up and under footwork guy. He can kind of do some face up isolation stuff, but he really wants to like play through contact or get to the spin move or like go behind the back. And often he dribbles into turnovers doing that sort of stuff. I do think one of the reasons why the like, you know, the stamina concern is like legit, why the contact concern can also be could be a bit of a red flag for Duke as like a basketball team this year, is because like they need him on the court so desperately. And you can see like once he got like in sort of foul trouble against Arizona, all of a sudden like John Shire has to problem solve the rest of the game. All of a sudden it's like, well, when can we play him? They're going to throw the ball to Ballo in the post. So then Duke starts double teaming. So Ballo can't, just maul Filipowski one-on-one on the block. But then you got to be able to rotate behind the play. So it'd be interesting to see how they manage that. I think they're going to need to play more Sean Stewart this year just to get his like length and athleticism on the court. But we'll see. As far as Filipowski goes, like as a prospect, I do believe the shot. Like I think he can be like an above the break dribble handoff playmaker and passer, and just a guy that, I don't think I see quite lottery talent. I'm not sure I maybe even see like starter in the NBA, but I see a guy that can just like be in rotations for a long time and be like a valuable offensive piece because like I think he'll shoot it, he can pass it, he gets to the free throw line, he can score one-on-one in certain situations from different levels. So I'm like in on Filipowski as a prospect, but like I do have a bit of a governor in terms of like where I see his like true upside. I'm not sure he's this like big time upside playmaking forward. Instead, I see him as just sort of like a floor raiser for your offense because you can do a lot of stuff with him in the half court.
I hope so. I hope so. I don't know if he is in the NBA playing as a seemingly as a 5, then he's going to have to do a lot of DHO and play really well out of that and like really shoot to compensate for getting targeted on the other end. If he's not a 5 and now he's guarding wings, I mean, I don't know. He does drive pretty well, but what you mentioned about the spin dribble and into turnovers, like NBA guys helping at the nail will feast on him if that doesn't get cleaned up. I think it's a little further away than maybe I thought it was this time last year, but
he needs the like Kelly Olynyk role. Like that's like that. I think like that's sort of like the bench big guy that can like, probably a 5, can play some 4 depending on who the 5 is next to him. But he's like Olynyk is obviously like can really shoot. So like,
yes,
I think Filipowski
really,
would have to really have to like jump a level as a shooter, even though I think of him as like an okay, front court shooter. But like that's the kind of role I see for him. And that's would be I think like that is his roadmap to a 10-year, a 12-year NBA career and helping teams also win basketball games.
Yeah. Jared McCain, who is probably their highest profile freshman, very good shooter as a guard, very smart player, good connecting passer is what I saw in that game. Reminded me in terms of play style, though, this player was better in college by the time he left, of Jared Butler at Baylor, kind of similar build. And, Butler was an excellent shooter, obviously, won a national title for a team that won 1 million games in their year. But McCain is a freshman and to me does not look like he is a one and done player. He has a long way to go on defense, doesn't really threaten the rim right now, doesn't really look like he's going to do that, and is existing in this timeshare with Proctor, where Proctor is the more electric ball handler and electric playmaker, better overall athlete. And so I don't really know that McCain is going to get a chance to have the sort of games and performances that would put him on the draft map this year. And to me, he just seems like a multi-year guy. But what do you see when you watch him?
Yeah, I think the plan coming into this year was that McCain and Caleb Foster, their other like high profile California guard, was that they weren't one and done players, that those guys would be back as like, Roach will move on, Proctor will go pro, and those guys return as sophomores as the starting backcourt with Cooper Flack, right? Like I think that was sort of the
who? No.
Yeah. Who's that? Yeah. But I thought that was the plan, but then McCain, he played really well at the CP3 like guard camp this summer back in August. He was good in preseason for Duke. He played well like in the scrimmages. He played well in the exhibition game, and so like it was interesting because like coming into the season, then all of a sudden everyone was sort of like wondering if is McCain, is he a one and done guy? You're right that he doesn't look like it because he's not super like he's like he's not like a small guard, but he's not like long. Like he's sort of like boxy and stocky. I don't know what his wingspan is, but like it's not plus a lot, that's for sure. And he's listed at 6'3". He's probably 6'2". He knows how to play basketball though, which is super exciting because like it's not just the connective passing. He scoops up long rebounds. He sets screens as a guard.
Yeah.
Can do he that moves without the ball. He had some looks against Arizona where, I thought like he and Proctor had some good looks that if two or three of those go down, like it's obviously like a very different game, but he can shoot off movement. They run sets they run some blocker mover stuff as well to get him coming off pin downs. He is also, this is now becoming a bit of a trend because I've been at all of these games so far this year at Cameron. You will find him shooting in the gym afterwards, like after the game, once everyone clears out. His brother is like has some sort of like secondary staff role and is usually putting him through a workout afterwards. He's strong. He can do some of the Villanova, like 2 feet, play off of 2 feet, post up, kind of like Barkley style stuff. I think the Butler comp is really good. Is like a fun one. I don't know. I need to see him play with the ball more to see sort of like where the handle is. Like
Butler's handle is tremendous.
So sick. I mean, it was one of the best for the 2021 draft. He's like he is I describe him as a like burrowing driver because he's like he's a below the rim finisher guy. And he doesn't have that sort of just like nuclear first step where he's just going to like, race by guys instantly, but he can keep guys on his hip. He can use his strength, his lower body strength. And then when he gets into the paint, he has that like Malcolm Brogdon style, like get inside the jersey of the guy and finish around them or again, get to 2 feet and play off of it. So there's some like, there's some like Jalen Brunson, Villanova, like, obviously Brunson is a tank. I'm not like, Brunson is a tough guy to compare to for a lot of reasons, but like he's got some of the like strong, small, like below the rim guard technique that those dudes have. I think it's gonna take some time, but if he starts to shoot better, like he can really go. And I'm very curious to see more of him this season. The one and done buzz that sort of like came on not quite out of nowhere, but that just sort of like over the course of like 2 to 3 months really popped. Like that caught me off guard. We'll see where it goes from here. It'll probably cool off a little bit, but yeah, he strikes me as like a pro, assuming he turns into like a big time shooter and continues to get stronger, but like a multi-year guy and, someone that would come back as like, one of the top returning players in the ACC in 2024, like one of those kinds of things. But,
and all of the guys that you were naming, another, Van Vliet, another guy, like these are all very complimentary players to
all of whom played like 4 years.
That's exactly right.
In college, like, Brogdon was a 5-year player at Virginia.
Because you have to, at that size, you have to be so skilled when you enter the NBA in order to make sure that you get minutes. That you have to hone the skill over a series of years. No one is going to say, well, you're an interesting player and you're 6'1". Here are minutes. It's just not going to happen in the NBA. So talk to me about Proctor. Tyrese Proctor had a great end to the season last year, more in the 6'5" range as a guard, more like a lot twitchier than McCain is.
Yes,
but he has some lotto hype right now because he played last year, age 17 turning 18. He like averaged, I think, maybe 15 a game during that win streak, when they were really cooking with Lively at 5. You mentioned that he and Lively really keyed that defense, and that was that team's identity, was defensive. And again, since they're playing Filipowski at 5 And he's an offensive weapon, and McCain and Proctor are offensive weapons. Proctor's the more sort of like off the dribble shot makery of the two. I think the identity of the team is a little unsettled because I don't know that they know exactly how they want to play offense, and defense, it's still like a big time work in progress. So we'll see how that all coalesces. But I think that Proctor's, for years and years, Proctor's archetype, this shot maker guard type, gets a lot of love throughout the year, and it can look really, really good, and it can turn into a really, really good NBA player. Proctor, I think, pretty good passer. I don't, and when you're a live dribble guy, you can dream on that a whole lot. My concern with him is that he is sort of a good shooter, not a great one, a good to very good athlete, not a great one, and that he's walking into a league where so many guards are so good, and he's still going to be entering it at a very young age, that he's going to be, behind the eight ball, where I think that he still needs to get a lot stronger, even though that he's a tenacious defender now. I don't think in the NBA he's going to be like a day one good defender. So like, I just think he's a little bit further away, probably, and it's more a comment on NBA guard play than it really is on him. But what do you think of his lotto hype now, and how far, like, what is a reasonable level to expect him to perform at this year for this team?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a Proctor guy since before he got to Duke. I really liked him playing for Australia in FIBA competition in 2022, sort of like a complimentary on-ball, off-ball role. And then he struggled early on last season, and then really came alive late in the year. I maintained that he was taking good shots, taking the right shots, like making the right plays often, and just like he was having some bad shooting luck. But there are a lot of indicators that and reasons to believe that his shot was going to sort of come around, at least like in terms of just like spot up threes, which it did over the course of the season. And then late in the year, he showed some interesting shot making tendencies. The Tennessee game, he was the only real source of offense, for Duke against the best defense in the country in a very physical defensive team in Tennessee. And Proctor made some just ridiculous shots in that contest. It did feel like, as much as I felt the first part of the year for him, I felt very bullish that it was going to sort of like, you're going to see some, it was going to regress in a good way for him. It did sort of like, looking into the numbers after the season was over, it did sort of feel like the hot play at the end was sort of like being propped up by like him shooting probably like a little bit above his weight on tough shots, like pull up, mid-range off dribble twos, like that type of stuff. And like, he's got some serious skill there. He really does this, like has this little like one-legged fadeaway that's like pretty cool. And it looks good and it goes in sometimes, but him having to like resort to that probably speaks to like, he's a 6'5" guard that needs to like use a fadeaway at times to like get his shot off. Mm-hmm. He's not like an amazing athlete in terms of just like north-south quicks. He doesn't get downhill. He doesn't really touch the paint a ton. That sort of like limits him some as a playmaker. He's very good at these, multi-level skip pass reads because he can see over the top of guys, and he really can leverage his shot and his height and his length to access certain passes. But he's not the kind of guy that's just going to like every single time just like turn the corner, touch the paint, make the read. He needs to use his wiggle, which I think he's improved. I think he's gotten like more flexible. I think that allows him to sort of like bend defenses, bend coverages, get into some tight spaces where his athleticism would maybe not always let him have access to, but that's like, that can also be like a tough way to live. So I was like if you want to talk like if you want to give Proctor a lottery grade, I think that's totally fine. Like I might, put a late lottery grade on him. I saw some places preseason having him like pick 7 or 8 preseason. Yeah. And I was like, whoa. Like, and I thought I was like the guy that was like driving the like Tyrese Proctor is a good prospect bust. And I would see that stuff and it was like, whoa, oh. I mean, like, look, maybe he was benefiting from being one of the top returners.
I think if you look at an 18-year-old who averages like 15 in conference play, you're going to get a lot of that. I mean, you are. But yeah, I feel the same way. I'm like, and for the record, I'm not saying that like I expect Proctor to play poorly this year or anything like that, or like he's not an NBA player or anything. This is more coming from a place of confusion for me because I don't see I don't see any signature skill that would put him in that conversation for me. And, but guys who can impact both sides of the ball at a young age are usually very good. And so I just want to watch more. That's more of what it is with me.
I think the sort of like one of the big sells for him coming into the season was that the shot, like the pull-up three had jumped a level. And, he had a tough shooting game against Arizona, but there were some other, preseason exhibition stuff where he shot it pretty well. I was at the exhibition game against UNC Pembroke, which is a very, very good college program. And I mean, he shot the leather off the ball in that game, just came out absolutely bombing. And hit 4 of his first 5 threes within the first 3 minutes of the game. So I think there's this hope that maybe he turns into not quite a nuclear off dribble shooter, but is he good enough at that sort of geek out coverages that allow him to see different looks and sort of turn the corner more reliably and get into some other windows and some passing opportunities. He does some small stuff that I really like. He's great at when he gives the ball up, relocating and getting back on the ball and then trying to get a second side drive. Yeah, I think he's quite good at doing that. And defensively, he isn't a guy that gets a lot of steals or anything like that, but he's just solid at staying attached to guys. He did a nice job guarding Caleb Love the other night, which he did multiple times last season when they matched up in Duke UNC games. But yeah, you're he does sort of seem like a jack of all trades that doesn't have a thing that he's fully mastered. Yeah. And the shot making is maybe the hope for that. And then the last thing I would say about Proctor is he does take himself if you wanted to look at the intangible component of this, he's taking this all very seriously. And not to say that no one other guys aren't, but he is very serious about off-season work, preparation. I think there are reasons to really buy into Proctor because I think he wants it really badly. And that may mean nothing in terms of how people evaluate prospects. That may mean nothing for his future as an NBA player or whatever. But
no, it will. I mean, that stuff.
He's very serious about this. You know what I mean? And I think
if he throws up 15 a night this year and they're good, and he goes to the combine and people see what kind of a person he is, then he'll get drafted in the first round like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the benefits of going to Duke because no one sleeps on you, certainly. So I all the best to him. I will say that in the NBA to say nothing of starting guards, I mean, that would be great for him if he ended up a starting NBA guard, but even rotational guards are either just walking buckets. You can be a walking bucket and be a rotation NBA guard. Cam Thomas, again, is an unfair comp. No one ever has played like Cam Thomas or ever will, as a freshman in the SEC. But that kind of, Bones Highland, whatever, just bucket guards. You have the sort of caretaker type, Trey Tyus Jones, speaking of Duke, who are, assist to turnover gods who can fight over screens and just constantly win minutes with how good they are there. Andrew Nemhard, TJ McConnell, these sorts of guys. It takes a lot of skill. It just takes a lot of skill. And I think my opinion right now on Proctor is that it's better if you enter the league maybe at age 21 or something like that to make sure that you're going to get the chance to do that, which a lot of those guys, that's when they entered the NBA. So we'll see.
I do like the like Trey Tyus Jones comp was like sort of what I like. I thought he was like a 6'4", 6'5" version of that last year.
There you go. Yeah.
At Duke. It does seem like he's starting to like lean more into like the shot making profile like this year. I mean, we'll see how that goes though.
Yeah. Speaking of what I think is likely a multi-year player, this is a freshman. This is going to be our first, I think, true baby 18-year-old freshman who turned 18 in July. Bub Carrington on Pitt, had a triple-double in his first ever college game against, I'm trying to remember who that was against. I don't even remember.
It wasn't. They played Binghamton in the second game. That's the one game of his I've seen so far this year.
Yeah,
Binghamton.
I forget who they played in their first game. Sorry to that program.
North Carolina A&T.
There it is. Yeah, North Carolina A&T.
Who is playing Virginia, I think, later this week, actually.
So Carrington, 6'4", clearly, like, needs to get a lot stronger, whatever. But a triple-double is a triple-double. And he did it shooting very, very well. Shot very well in each of his first two games. And I don't know that I saw him, maybe outside of transition, ever get to the rim. And that's why I think he's probably a multi-year guy. Again, as a guard, you really got to have the goods when you enter the league at, all three levels in order to make sure you get your minutes. But an extremely high feel player playing on a team in Pitt that I think has a very good chance to, be a top 25 team as the year goes on. They have Zachary Hinson, who is an older player, but averaged, I think, almost 17 a game for them last year. Big, beefy wing who can play inside, outside, the type of really fun college player. They have Zack Austin, who we'll mention again in a moment because we both liked him for quite a while, transferring from High Point in your neck of the woods. Ishmael Leggett, who's another guard who's more of the, built out, but like 6-foot guard with a lot of burst, who, can rebound pretty well for his size, get downhill, sort of take over games for, 4 or 5 possessions in a row. But Carrington is there, like, he is their starting point guard. Whenever they run any sort of set, really, or they need someone to bring the ball up and get things going, they rely on him. And anytime a freshman is put in that spot for a team with aspirations of being good in a major conference, it's notable. And the returns, the shot has gone in, but he's getting his rebounds because he positions himself very, very well, and he seeks the ball very, very well. He has that sort of extra sense of how a play is going to unfold. And his passes, even though he doesn't constantly threaten the rim, his passes are on the money, and his reads, whether it's skips or in two-man actions, have been good. I want to see how it holds up against better competition. And I think physically, since he's not, a beast, it's probably going to take a couple years. But I think he is a lot of fun to watch play. High field guy who will have this sort of all-around impact on a lot of games at a very young age, which is very exciting. So what do you think of a Bub Carrington? He's
been just an awesome like transition hit ahead passer and pick and roll operator so far. I mean, the pull-up shooting has been will cool off at some point this year because he's been, arguably or one of the best pull-up shooters through the first, week and change of the season. But the step back, like separation, that stuff looks really smooth and good. Obviously he's very like pull up too long, too jumper dependent. He's not really getting to the rim. He didn't get to the line much, at least through the first 2 games.
No, I don't think he will, unless he can sort of do the jail dribble, put someone on my back and try to grift that way. But
that might be the next thing. Like that might be sophomore year version of him. He certainly has like the size, and I mean, if he continues to be a great pull-up shooter, then you can play off of that gravity. You can play off the pull-up and step back gravity. Like that can create creases for you to get into as well. I think the like pick and pop decision-making passing has been really good too. And he's got some great guys to run with. Like you mentioned, Blake Hinson, who's an absolute tank at like the stretch forward position. But even the Diaz Graham brothers, like
yeah, they're fun.
they're
Yeah.
like those guys. Like I mean, they're both very skinny, but like those guys could be. I think they're prospects too,
I
like, to an extent.
I kind of agree. Yeah.
And those they're mobile and they're trying to pop and shoot and with Federico, you've got a guy that can just like slip and dive. So he's got like nice options in the front court to work with in terms of like the screen and dive and screen and pop game. So I really like him. Like obviously like he's had an incredible start and he'll play against better teams and some coverages will start like tilting towards him and that'll make things a little bit tougher if he's like at the top of like scouting reports for opposing ACC defenses or whatever. But like terrific start, looks like an excellent young guard just because like his feel, the shooting and maybe if the passing isn't like super duper advanced right now, like just like the constant like hitting his marks in terms of decision making as a young freshman ball handler is super, like it's really encouraging this early on. So I've only seen the Binghamton game so far. I think they played again tonight, but looking forward to seeing more of him go forward. He's very enticing young guard prospect, and I love like the like screen and roll and screen and pop options he has to work with at Pitt.
Yeah, and mentioning, you mentioned all the players in the front court he has to run with. I think that he's going to be a very good steward of that offense. Nothing has really looked forced from him, which again, like he just plays with a certain level of maturity that attracts me to him, especially given the fact that he's a year younger than most freshmen are. But Zack Austin, we have gone back and forth on Zack Austin because as playing at High Point, entering the transfer portal, and I think he had plenty of interest. He was sort of like, he was a dunks and threes maven at High Point because he is legitimately 6'7" and legitimately an NBA level athlete. Like no question that he is an NBA level athlete. And so you see the profile and you think, oh, he's a wing. This is going to be a guy who is going to work his way onto draft boards. The vibes at Pitt look really good. Like he seems like he really enjoys being there, and the team, at least through 2 blowouts, has enjoyed playing with one another. But I do worry that, he is sort of the 5th option on offense every single time that he has been on the court so far. And I feel like that is likely to continue. And I used to be maybe I still am, a real sucker for like the 5th option in college who just, if you just gave him a chance in the NBA, like it's all going to come together. Like, trust me, this is a diamond in the rough. Sometimes that player is Trey Murphy III, and they're one of, the 3 best shooters on the planet. Other times they're Patrick Williams. And, so there can be a spectrum. Zack is going to be a guy I'm going to want to like all year, and I'm going to watch plenty of their games. But I do sort of see now that the way that team is unfolding, it's going to be hard for him to really make a name for himself, as a transfer coming in. What do you think about him?
Yeah, I mean, this is like an issue. This is like an interesting discussion in terms of like scalability, because you're mentioning like these sort of like lower usage college guys in the NBA. Could you scale them up? Could they be a rotation player, or even more than that, perhaps, like once you get them to the next level? Like with Austin going from High Point in the Big South to Pittsburgh in the ACC, he's scaling, like so far, like he's in the process of like scaling down from being like a not insane usage guy, but like a higher usage guy to maybe being a little bit lower. I will just say, like, I will trust guys that are athletic, that get dunks and shoot threes. So
yeah,
like
ultimately,
exactly
right.
Like it's just like, it's like sometimes you don't need to overthink this. It's like bet on the athlete. And like if it doesn't work, you're like, well, at least I bet on the 6'7" guy that could fly. And if it didn't work, it just wasn't meant to be, or, whatever. But like the 3-point shooting is interesting for him too, because like High Point would put him in some movement last season. If you know, I know you saw him some there too, but like he's got some versatility to his shot diet. It's not just like pure like stationary catch and shoot and try to catch and go. Like he can do stuff. So my hope would be that like his role will get sorted out. It's tough. There's a lot of guys in the front court room that are good and need playing time, and they've got two guards. We've just talked, with that we just talked about, including Leggett, that like need, they need usage, they need the ball too. So I would just hope, at least for the time being, just like buy into the role of cutter, get on the glass, transition finish, show your athleticism, and like the threes will eventually, like those opportunities will pop up. And then I don't know. I think he can find a role. I'm willing to bet on him because I like guys from the Big South Conference. I like seeing them do well as transfers. But I do believe in him like as a prospect, because I think the athleticism is pretty special. So I'm willing to bet on that, but it has not been like a great start, through 2 or 3 games or whatever for him with Pitt.
Yeah, I will. And speaking of dunks and threes and what a combination it is, I know you mentioned you haven't watched much Notre Dame yet, so I'll just mention Kerry Booth, another I believe July 05 birthday, another true 18-year-old. Now he is 6'10", like a pretty clear 6'10" or taller. And he looks like he's 18. Like he needs to get a lot stronger. It sometimes when he's a good mover, runs the floor very hard, plays very hard, but it almost looks like his upper body is moving sort of on a different plane than his lower body, just because he needs to build out his core a lot. But he is a stretch 4, stretch 5. The 3 has gone in plenty for him already through 2 games at Notre Dame. And he is not, in contrast to Austin, he is not going to find himself the 5th option, even though he is this true freshman at Notre Dame. Booth, when I watched him against Western Carolina, which is a game that Notre Dame actually lost, but when I watched him, he, unlike a lot of young bigs who shoot threes, he was engaged in the game all the time. Antenna was always up. He cares about really, setting and making contact on his screens, even though he's really skinny. Really tries to give his guards an advantage there. And when he gets the ball in the high post, has legitimate vision. Nothing crazy, but like he sees the passes to make to cutters and will look to make them, does not have sort of tunnel vision as just sort of a threes and dunks, play finisher only kind of a guy. Has shown a little bit of a sense of when to leave his feet and when to stay grounded and position himself for a rebound off a jumper. Just like, I think he has pretty good two-way feel, and two-way feel at his size with shooting touch. He is an 18-year-old and he's skinny, but his frame is good. And he is someone who should put on very good weight, especially, again, being a year younger than most freshmen are. So he, to me, is a real-time legitimate prospect. He is not nuclear off of his feet. He's, again, comparing him to another 18-year-old sort of big who could move of years gone by. He's not Jaren Jackson Jr., who is, a great all-around athlete. That is not him. So I don't know that he's like a top 10 lottery pick kind of a guy, but he is someone who I think will appear on more draft boards as the year goes on. Might be probably is better served to be a multi-year guy. You don't want to get caught in the, again, forgive the Hornets reference, the JT Thor, the Kai Jones sort of, you're tall and you do stuff, but what are you? I think that Booth has probably, JT's got decent feel, but I think Booth is going to have more feel as a prospect than either of those two. But like Isaiah Todd, another example of this sort of tall, skinny player who can shoot, but maybe not physically ready, not enough of an all-around game to come into the league and lock down minutes. So probably a multi-year guy himself, but by the time he's done at Notre Dame, I think a lot of people will know his name. So I wanted to mention him.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to see his film, in part because the new head coach at Penn State, Micah Shrewsbury, replaced Mike Bray, who was a really good offensive
Notre
mind.
Dame, you mean, not Penn State.
That's what. Yeah, he came from Penn State at Notre Dame. Now Mike Bray, now an assistant with Quinn Snyder in the Atlanta Hawks, but a guy whose offense I really admired in the college game for a while. I finally had a chance to this like spring summer to start go through Penn State Shrewsbury film, because I wanted to see Jalen Pickett, I wanted to see Seth Lundy, and I wanted to see Penn State's offense before Micah came to the ACC to kind of get a feel for it. So it checked a lot of boxes for a team to watch for me. Micah Shrewsbury, before being the head coach at Penn State, was an assistant at Purdue, was an assistant with the Boston Celtics. And so if you can think of some of the like 5-out concepts that you've seen from the Celtics with Brad Stevens or Matt Painter at Purdue, you saw some of that at Penn State. I'm imagining we'll see some of that at Notre Dame, but you see both like the delay 5-out center initiating in the middle of the court. And you will also see the old San Antonio Spurs motion strong, which is the staggered screens on one side of the court for a shooter coming out of the corner. Usually one of those screeners is going to be a big guy that's going to pop into space. And so you get that same sort of like 5-out spacing, but with some movement and coming from a different angle on the court. So for a guy who as you're describing him, profiles as like, a stretch, front court prospect, it seems like he landed in a good spot for him to sort of like take advantage, a system that can sort of like take advantage and amplify his skill set over multiple years.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. And when he comes back next year, assuming he does, unless he just is bonkers this year, I think he, like I said, good frame. I think he could like land this time next year and people like, oh my God, he has really filled out. Like this is absolutely no doubt going to be an NBA prospect, going into 2025. But all right, man, we have still a few people to get to. I'll say a couple of returners. One, I think, is likely to get drafted this year and probably in the second round, like his teammate Hunter Tyson was this past draft. That's PJ Hall, who went through the whole draft process. The Clemson's sort of offense begins and ends with him. He had 27 against UAB, this past week, and just like good touch all over the court, good post player, but can stretch and pop the three. Not the best mover. I think will be an NBA bench player, get a look, but he's an upperclassman guy. A sophomore returner who also went through the draft process was Judah Mintz with Syracuse. So I'll say out of the two of those, in terms of sort of long-term NBA prospects, who do you prefer and who do you expect to have whose team do you expect to have the better overall year in the ACC this year?
I think Clemson will be better, but I do like Mintz more as a prospect long term. Hall had a big skill development last year where his jump shot really had a growth, and like all of a sudden with he and Hunter Tyson, they could really do some dangerous stuff with like pick and pop, staggered high ball screen sets. And Brad Brunell's offense does also, they have a lot of like Princeton components, so there's a lot of like high post center initiation. This is where Amir Sims was such a killer for them a couple of years ago. And Hall early on in the season is getting more of those playmaking high post looks, which is I think that's interesting. I don't know what it sort of like implies for his like development or his look as a prospect or whatever, but for a college player, it's interesting. I like Mintz quite a bit. I think he's a really talented isolation pick and roll player. Maybe wasn't super efficient at that last season, but the flashes were good. He was one of a few guys. I've watched just about every Reece Beekman game at UVA to bring this all full circle. Mintz as a freshman last year handled the Beekman assignment about as well as anyone I've seen so far. Like you could pull up the Syracuse UVA games from last year, and like Mintz as freshman did very well against third year, all ACC defender. One of the things I do like about Mintz is I think he was such a gunner coming out of Oak Hill in high school. I think he showed that he can actually be a playmaker for others in the college level. And this was a small thing, but one of my favorite things with Mintz last year was like Syracuse's offense, not the most free-flowing enterprise underneath a totally checked out Jim Boeheim, would stagnate often. And Mintz was really good at, like, let's say one of the forwards had the ball, they caught it in space, dribbles picked up, possession is dying on a vine. Mintz is pretty darn good at sprinting towards that guy, getting a handoff, and then using that to like get downhill. He bailed out a fair amount of possessions last season by just like running to the guy, getting the ball, immediately turning the corner, and then either, getting fouled. He got to the line a ton last year. We'll see where the shot lands with him, but I think Mintz, I still think there's like playmaking upside with him that I'm willing to buy into. With Hall, it's really just like, he's a 6'10" guy that might be able to shoot, and so those guys aren't
you
like,
just sounded so deflated. Oh man.
They're like those guys, they're not a dime a dozen. In fact, like being his size and like PJ Hall, by the way, like has had one of the best jump hooks in college basketball for like 4 years now. Like sneaky good, crafty. Again, that doesn't mean much for NBA prospects, but he's always been like had really nice touch from the post. And he has been a good free throw shooter. So maybe there is some shooting upside. It's just like you do need to be able to do more stuff with the ball than just like shoot, and maybe that's where some of the high post initiation will come into play for him. But I'd rather bet on young, ball handler with playmaking upside than I would like a 6'10" guy that like is starting to like show some signs in terms of being like a better like stretch option.
So let me ask you then, are you sure that you prefer Proctor to Mintz, or are you not sure?
No, I prefer, I have to think about it, but like off the top of my head, I would prefer Proctor to Mintz.
I watched Mintz a little bit last year, but the little I watched of him, I figured that he was a multi-year guy. And he got some first round buzz at some,
late in
during the draft cycle. If you might be an NBA player, someone's going to put you in the first round at some point in, our sector of people who cover this stuff. But I'm going to watch him a lot more closely this year. Good length. Thought he was pretty good during the scrimmages, but the shot didn't really go in. But I saw plenty to like, so I haven't watched him yet this year, but looking forward to.
Yeah. And he and JJ Starling, that's an interesting backcourt. Starling is a prospect at Syracuse, and Joe Girard, formerly of Syracuse, now at Clemson, playing with PJ Hall. So Clemson picked up a couple interconference transfers this past offseason, actually, including Girard.
I have a couple other guys on my list, but they're also like, we're starting to get deeper. So I'll just say, is there anyone else in the ACC that you want to mention? And then we'll try to combine this as best we can. But anyone else you want to shout out?
I don't think at this point quite yet. I would put in Miles Kelly from Georgia Tech. I don't know if he was one of the names on your list, but a guy that 6'4", 6'5", nice wingspan, can really shoot off movement. Played very well in Josh Pastner's like offense, found a role as like a cutter, a DHO shooter, was probably the closest like facsimile in the ACC to Terquavion Smith last year in just terms of like, twitchy guard that has, NBA range off the catch. I haven't seen much of him yet this season, but I'm very curious to see what Miles Kelly looks like. His third year in college and first year playing for Damon Stoudemire, probably a little bit more of a conventional system than Josh Pastner, who, Princeton offense, and then on defense, 1-3-1 zone, 2-3 zone, matchup zone, man-to-man defense, like all those changing coverages. So I'll be curious to see what Kelly looks like playing for Stoudemire this season, but he's a guy that I certainly have my eye on at Tech.
Okay. Yeah, the guy that I will shout out is Cam Hildreth at Wake Forest. This episode in many ways was just a roundabout, speaking of a digression, to get to the main event here. But no, Cam is a very clever player, particularly inside the arc. He has range out to three, but we mentioned compare someone else to two-time champion national player of the year, Jalen Brunson.
Jalen Brunson.
But like he in terms of someone who has a lot of tricks, you know, Cam is built stockily. He's built pretty well, but he's not like 6'1". He's probably in the 6'3", 6'4" range. And he has a lot of tricks with his feet in the lane. He doesn't have a blinding first step, but lots of pivots, lots of Euros. And for someone who is not an insane athlete, but not bad, he finishes with strength a lot. And lots of guys try to draw contact purely to try to draw the foul call with no intention of really trying to finish the hoop. But he stays on balance very, very well. And his final stride, this is also sort of a nerdy specific thing, but his final stride in the paint, you know, deceleration is such a weapon used by so many NBA players now, increasingly so, because it messes with defenders' timing. You do not need to be blindingly fast to use deceleration to your advantage. And Cam, like, the key to it is being able to stay on balance. If you can stay on balance and you can get to that last step in an unexpected way, then you're going to have plenty of looks. And I feel like Hildreth can do that. He has very good touch. He has good, you know, driving sense. You know, defensively, never going to be much of anything, but he'll give effort. And so I'm just watching him. You know, he had an amazing first game when they beat Elon. The second game against Georgia, haven't watched. They lost by like one possession, and Hunter Salas, Gonzaga transfer, former top 15 recruit, went like 5 of 18 and sort of tanked their chances in that game. But I'm watching Cam Hildreth because I believe in his ability to score in ACC competition against good defenders at an efficient level. And efficient scoring guards are going to get my attention. So shout out to Cam.
True power guard. And he is very fond of the Barkley style drive. Like, it's something he will talk about. Loves to just post guys up. He was absolutely, and this will probably be true again this year, their best post player. Like, once they lost Jake LaRavia 2 years ago, and maybe even Alondas Williams, who are both two very good, like, playmaking low post guys 2 years ago, Hildreth was the one guy for them. And Wake was so aggressive the two previous seasons in terms of using guard to guard screening actions to try to get a switch, and then use that guy to use the, you know, Alondas Williams or LaRavia, Cam Hildreth last year, to just post up and just literally they'll just clear out a side of the court, and they'll take the offensive player that the worst perimeter defender is guarding on the court. They'll have that guy screen for Hildreth, and then they'll try to get a switch, and then they'll let Cam go to work. He's really good at that, really, really good at that. And you've seen like Wake just like chase guys off the court because they're just ruthlessness in doing this, and Hildreth being a back to the basket bully at 6'3", 6'4". Despite that, I don't want to pigeonhole him into just a post up player. So I'm glad you mentioned some of the other like craft that he has. Like, he is a creative scorer with some real strength. So I like Hildreth a lot. He's a unique offensive player, I think, in terms of the at least, you know, the ACC corner of the universe. And another person that I will certainly have my eye on this season. And if they're really going to like lean into Andrew Carr at 5, and they seem to sort of be platooning him with
Matthew Marsh,
who's a really nice development story, like in terms of just like, you know, over the span of basically 2 years, they've turned him into a nice like dive, you know, lob catcher at the center spot. But with Carr, they can play 5 out, they can invert things, and then they can let Hildreth like try to beat up guys on the block. And look, Wake's not even a complete team right now. You know, Damari Monsanto, who's, you know, a 6'6" guy that can really forgive me, I probably shouldn't curse like that, but can really shoot off the catch and off movement. And, you know, he will be a big piece for them to have. I made it 2+ hours and was good.
No, that's okay. It happens, man.
Yeah. Anyways,
Damari Monsanto shot 18 threes per 100 possessions last year. So if you lose yourself a little bit thinking about him, then I can understand.
Big time range, and he can shoot off movement. They ran a lot of actions for Monsanto last year too. So like, if he comes back healthy, like maybe he's a guy that like, you know, people on the next level like pay some attention to, if they're just, because certain people in like front offices are just going to be like looking for guys with size who shoot threes, you know, and so maybe he's a guy that
he's going to get a look.
Play,
it's like, volume shooting, we can scoff at it all we want, but like there's volume shooting and then there's like volume shooting. Steph Curry at Davidson, or maybe I'm mixing up. Maybe it was Steph who shot 18 threes per 100, but like Monsanto's right there. And as an off-ball guy, I mean, he gets them up and it wasn't like he shot that many and shot like 33% on them either. You know, he is a really, has at least a superficial case as one of the better movement shooting prospects in the country. Sure. If you're looking at just that specialty. So, yeah. All right, Brian, I should have known, halfway through your Beekman analysis, this is going to be a long one. But it is always a pleasure. I'll ask as a closing question, we've focused a lot on NBA prospects and how these teams are going to fit together, but give me the teams in the ACC that you expect to be NCAA tournament teams, just as a fun thing to chart.
Yeah. So Miami, Virginia, UNC, Duke. I think Clemson has a chance. Virginia Tech, Pitt, Virginia Tech. I'm probably naming too many of them at this point. I think there are like 4 to 5 certain locks. I think probably 6 or 7 will end up getting in there. Probably leaving someone off here. But yeah, the 2 Virginia schools. NC
Miami,
Duke. Miami, Duke, UNC.
Okay. We'll just leave it there. Yeah, I think Pitt will make the tournament. I will say that right now. So we'll say 6. Virginia, Virginia Tech, Miami, Duke, UNC, and Pitt.
Yeah, I'm not feeling any like I left anyone off there. I think Clemson, Virginia Tech, they've got chances. Maybe NC State, but they're gonna have to figure out their guard room a little bit. I think for State to really have like that kind of like postseason upside this year.
All righty. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Brian. As always, this is a pleasure. We'll do it again as we get closer to tournament time and we're charting conference play. Thank you all very much for listening. Enjoy this ACC season. I'm going to have other episodes covering other parts of the country, but I had to start in the Atlantic coast given the guest. So thank you all. This has been Chucking Darts. It's okay to be wrong about sports. Find your dartboard and start chucking. Thank you.